Welcome back to Inside Politics. Our guest today is Dr. John Weil. He's a political science professor at Middle Tennessee State University and the Dean of the Honors College. Dr. Weil, we're talking about President's Weekend. We're talking about this particular president. This administration seems to get more exercise than anybody else in crisis communications, and they get a lot of it, but I don't think they're always getting better at it. This current scandal they've got going on in terms of domestic violence now seems to be mushrooming into questions about security clearances, because a lot of top-level people at the White House a year in still don't have those clearances. I mean, who's in charge of crisis communications?
Again, this partly goes to what I said earlier about because Trump has not had prior political experience, and he hasn't necessarily surrounded himself with people who have. In fact, I mean, one of them who has would be Jeff Sessions, and he sort of seems to be on the outs. And so I think he has a large pool of people from the business world that he can draw from, but I'm not sure that they're necessarily the same as the kind of people you would typically get for the political world. Another
reason presidents have trouble keeping messages online and on track are leaks, and this administration has, as all presidents have had this kind of problem with leaks. Is there really anything that can be done about leaks? Because in some cases it's the White House itself that's leaking things, and sometimes it's warring factions within the White House doing it.
It is. I don't know of any solution to it. I think it's, you know, and particularly one of the things that apparently Trump tried to do early on was have agreements that when people left, you know, they were under some obligation not to disclose. I don't know if they're enforceable in court or not, but as you say, they don't seem to have worked.
This may be an incomparable question, but who do you compare Donald Trump to? Is he incomparable in terms of the 44 people that came before him?
Well, it depends on what aspects. I once said he has the personality in a sense of a Teddy Roosevelt. Just, you know, when he comes into the room, he sort of he takes all the air out. You know, they said this about the debates. His credibility, I'm afraid, is getting to the point of Lyndon Johnson's and maybe even Richard Nixon's. I don't think, you know, he's a little bit, could be perceived at least as a little bit like the boy who cries wolf too much, and people no longer believe him.
President Trump has a portrait of Andrew Jackson from Tennessee.
He does.
The president there, he seems to talk about him every time he comes to this state. What are the comparisons between Jackson and
Well,
Trump?
and a number of, I believe John Meacham is one who has drawn that comparison. You know, Jackson was known as a very populistic president. He was going to appeal directly to the people, almost a plebiscite, sort of plebiscitory presidents, where, you know, if the people say they want something, you know, don't worry so much about checks and balances, you know, criticize the court, tell Congress, you know, they're doing wrong. Sometimes that works, but, you know, after a while.
Now, we did see one policy area of agreement this week between Donald Trump and Barack Obama. They both want to sell the Tennessee Valley Authority and its transmission lines. Yeah. Is there much chance that's going to happen through Congress? Already Senator Alexander says he's against it, and so is Bob Corker, the other senator.
You know, I know that there have been discussions of this at least since the 1964 campaign, because I happen to remember that one.
It didn't work too well for Barry Goldwater.
No, it didn't. I'm not sure it's quite as partisan an issue now as it was then, but my guess would be probably not.
The one thing the Republicans take credit for this year, and the president does as well, was passing late last year the Tax Cut Act. Now there's been another budget passed through, a 2-year budget, but both of them seem to be pretty heavy on the red ink. Republicans used to be the party that was against deficit spending. Did they switch scripts with the Democrats? What happened?
You know, that's not completely new. One of the great ironies of American history, of recent American history, is that, you know, the president who sort of started running up the debt was Ronald Reagan. And the president who had the only balanced budget that I can remember or consecutive balanced budgets in a long time was Bill Clinton. So I think, you know, that tends, it's almost like you have a cabal among, you know, both Democrats and Republicans. If they can't agree on anything, it's they both want more spending. You know, Republicans typically on the military, and Democrats typically on social programs.
Historically, the president that's in the White House sees his party lose seats in the Congress in a midterm election that's coming up in November. How do you see it right now? Is Donald Trump and the Republicans likely to lose seats in both the House and maybe the Senate?
Very likely in the House. I'm not sure they'll lose
retake
control
the House.
Of the
Democrats
Senate.
Retake the House?
Well,
it might be easier, even though it's a larger number of seats.
If Trump were the ordinary candidate, I would say it's a good possibility. But we sort of learned in the last election, I was not the only political scientist who didn't think Trump had a chance of getting the nomination. And then, we did. My friend Kent Seiler and I had something called the May West effect may elect Donald Trump. And it was the notion that if you thought both candidates were high negatives, that maybe you'd go with the one you hadn't tried before. And so, but apart from that, most of us got it wrong.
Tennessee has an open seat in the Senate coming up.
Yes, it does.
It wasn't expected to be open, but maybe it's not going to be open either. Bob Corker's talking about, is saying, at least his staff says he's reconsidering about running again. What are your thoughts about that? Do you think Bob Corker can get back in and be effective, win the Republican nomination, and keep the seat?
Of course, he got Man of the Year or Person of the Year for the Tennessean fairly recently. He's, there are times when it's just hard to diagnose. He seems like he's sort of standing up to Trump, and then when it comes down to the votes, he often goes with him. And so I'm not sure. Do you get both sides, or more likely, do you have both sides against you? I'm not. I do think that I think Phil Bredesen has a really good chance of being a formidable Democratic candidate, and I think part of what may be happening is the Republican Party looks around and says, if we have a sitting senator who's already gotten there and knows the ropes, he may have a better chance than trying to bring in somebody new.
Dr. John Weil, political science professor at Middle Tennessee State University, is our guest. He's also the dean of the Honors College. We're talking about President's Day and the current president. We're also mixing in a little Tennessee politics. Back to continue that conversation after you watch these messages.